Okay, we might as well get started. So Maddie, do you want to take that screen off? Okay. So can people see me? All right. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Gordon McAllister. I'm the president of the Conservation Council of the ACT and region. So I'd like to welcome you here tonight for this very interesting environment exchange on protecting the southeast forests of New South Wales. Our executive director, Helen Oakey, would normally be facilitating these sorts of exchanges. She's been called away to deal with some parental issues, but she'll be joining us a bit later on. So I'm just sort of doing the introduction for her. But before we start, I'd just like to make an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land on which I am based anyway, the Ngunnawal people, and also want to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the South Coast and the Southeast Forests, pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also want to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and valuable contribution they're continuing to make to our region. And also like to welcome any First Nations people who may be attending today's event. So today we're discussing the forests of Southeast region, and obviously a lot of Canberrans have a strong connection to the coast. We go down there for our holidays. A lot of people have holiday houses. Probably some of you on the screen actually live in that area, so hopefully we all have a very strong connection to that area. During the 2019 and 2020 summer, the southeast forests were devastated by fire. They're unprecedented, and we're still trying to work out the full impacts of those fires on the ecosystems and biodiversity. But obviously, before those fires, the forests are already being affected by forestry operations and wood chipping. So tonight we want to shed some light on the impact of those fires, talk about how the logging industry has sort of resumed in those areas, and what we can do to protect those beautiful places and the flora and fauna of that area. So we're very fortunate to have 4 presenters tonight for this event. We have Professor David Lindenmayer from the ANU. We have Brad Smith, who is stepping in for Chris Gambian on behalf of the New South Wales Nature Conservation Council. We have Joslyn van der Moolen from the Canberra Forest Alliance and Harriett Swift from the Southeast Region Conservation Alliance. So first, David's going to talk, and he's going to outline the impacts of native forest logging and the impacts of the fires on the impact they've had on the southeast forests and biodiversity. Brad is then going to talk about the current logging that's underway at the moment, and the campaigns that are taking place. And Joslyn and Harriet are going to wrap up the presentations and talk about how residents around the region are taking action and what more we can do. So just a few housekeeping measures before we get on to the presentations. So if you'd like to ask questions, can you please just put them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and also write at the start of your question, actually write in question. So Maddie, who's managing the Zoom, can track the questions that come in. So if you can just type in question, and if you have it to a specific speaker, can you just also type in the name of the speaker as well that you want the question directed to? And Maddie and Helen, when she gets here, will be managing that process. And just keep your Zoom on mute, sorry, on mute, and yeah, just wait your turn. If you ask questions, just wait for Helen or to let you in to speak. So can I pass you on to David Lindenmayer, who's a leading expert in forest ecology and resource management at ANU. He's running long-term research programs in the southeastern Australia associated with conserving biodiversity on farmland and in plantations and reserves. And I understand he has maintained some of the largest long-term research programs in Australia, some exceeding 37 years. It's pretty amazing. So can I pass the Zoom on to David? And I'm very interested to hear your talk.
Thanks very much. So let's see if we can get this screen working now, Maddie. Okay. Is that working there?
That's
that end?
Good. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I'm going to look at the three themes of fire, biodiversity, and logging and their interaction. I've got 44 slides, but I'm going to be fairly quick as I move through them. So I wanted to touch on some key topics. One is the extent of the fire and how that and the frequency of fire is actually increasing quite dramatically. The role of climate that sits behind that, but also the fact that the way the forest behaves matters before the fire, the impacts of what happens after fire, particularly if it's salvage logged, and then some things that we can do. Now, my focus is on work that's drawn from Victoria, but the really important thing here is that many of the implications of the work have significant impact on what's happening in southeastern New South Wales, particularly the fact that a lot of the Eden woodchip mill is actually fueled by timber that's cut in East Gippsland, and we'll come to that in a moment. So you know, a lot's been made of what happened in the last Black Summer fires, you know, the extent of the country that was burnt, how many individual animals were lost, the cost, estimated to be over $100 billion by Professor John Quiggin at University of Queensland. But I think it's really important to look a lot more deeply at this issue of the forest condition and subsequent fire. So recently, Chris Taylor and I wrote a paper for the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences about what was happening in the fires in northeastern Victoria, and more recent analysis led by people at Griffith University show that what we see in northeastern Victoria is actually replicated pretty strongly across the border. So in a Victorian context, what we see is that the extent of megafires more than 1 million hectares in size is actually increasing. So if we look here, since 2003, we've had 3 megafires. In the previous century, there was a megafire in 1939 and another one in the 1800s. So we've had 3 in 17 years, but only 1 in each of the preceding centuries. And we actually can see what's going on is that there are places that are starting to burn not twice, not 3 times, but even 4 times in the last 25 years. And the implications of that are really quite extraordinary from many perspectives. So one is that we see a massive decline in old growth forest right across Victoria. And we know that a similar thing is happening in southeastern New South Wales. So nearly 80% of old growth cover in Victoria alone has been lost in that last 25 years. So essentially what we're seeing is a big increase in the amount of forest that's burning. So a paper that was published in the last couple of days by Luke Collins shows that the amount of high severity fire is also increasing over time. And some areas of forest have burnt 3 to 4 times in 25 years when the normal fire regime should be roughly once every 75 to 150 years. And that has enormous impacts, as we'll come to in a moment. But this paper is not yet published, but it shows that the probability of forest getting to 80 years when you would normally cut a forest for a saw log is less than 20%. So this is quite substantial in terms of its knock-on impacts. So let's move quickly to fire and climate. And there's no doubt that the key driver of fire is long-term climate and short-term weather. And when you're analysing fire effects, you actually need to take fire weather into account, which is really important. So there's no doubt the climate is changing and changing quickly. The estimates are that we've seen about a 1 degree rise since the 1960s. So our background levels of CO2 should be around about 280 parts per million. Just a couple of days ago, they were sitting, or a couple of weeks ago, they were sitting at 418 parts per million. Now, this is really important because of the link between CO2 and temperature. And we could see that, for example, in the last black summer fire season that we experienced. Now, the IPCC suggests that we'll be up by about 1.5 degrees by 2030. And some of the latest work that I've been reading suggests that we might be somewhere between 3 and 5 degrees by 2100. Now, the implications for fire are extraordinary because the number of forest fire danger index days above extreme levels is now 10 times greater than it was in 1960. So in my lifetime, it's increased 10 times. So that has really big implications for fire. Now, despite what you might hear from fire experts such as Peter Credlin, the reality is that there is a strong link between climate change and the risk of wildfire. And it's linked around this, around the statistical science of attribution. So when you're watching Sky After Dark, just have a think about this notion of the strong link between fire and climate change, because it's real and it's present and it's now. So underneath this impact of climate change and fire weather, it's quite clear that the state of a forest at the time that it's burnt has very big impacts. So a fire in an old forest has quite a different impact relative to a fire in a young forest. So how do we know this? Well, we've actually studied this in quite some detail. We know that the severity of fire is lower in old forest. We know that animals are either more likely to persist or recolonize faster. And we know that the recovery by plants is also stronger when an old forest is burnt relative to when a young forest is burnt. Now, the other thing that's very important here is that logging increases the risk of high severity fire. So a logged and regenerated forest burns at higher severity. And we can see that in this graph here, that the probability of canopy fires, so these are crown scorching fires, goes from almost zero when the forest is quite young, up to nearly 70% in that period from roughly 10 years to about 40 years post-logging. And it doesn't start to approach normal background levels at about 10% until the forest is 100 years old. So this was a very controversial paper when it was first published, but we've actually seen this kind of effects in other forests all around the world. And already this slide is out of date, even though I wrote it this morning, and that's because the paper that was in review in 2020 is now accepted as of today. So that's fantastic, and I'll show you why that's an important outcome in a moment. So we are aware that the effects of logging actually did make the fires worse in 2019 and 2020. There's a review paper that we wrote recently on this. And then we did a meta review of studies around Australia and around the world. And this is published at this website if you want to access this. And the reasons for the elevated fire severity effect are probably manifold. One is that there's a lot of debris that's left in a log forest that adds to the fuel load, even after regeneration burn. The ground layer is much drier. For example, you have a lot less tree ferns. The soil is drier. So Al Bowd's work in 2019 showed this. And the architecture of the forest has changed. So you often have a very dense regrowth forest that's growing up. And so this effect of elevated fire severity occurs for about 40 years after the logging has taken place. So if we were to log a forest tomorrow, that elevated fire severity effect would still be there in 2060 when I'm approximately 100 years old. So the reason why we're excited about the results of our paper being accepted this morning in Ecosphere is that the result that we saw earlier was from the Central Highlands area of Victoria, but the same pattern, this what we call left skewed polynomial shaped curve that has an elevated pitch in risk of a crown burn, which then starts to dissipate. We now see that in East Gippsland and most likely also in southeastern New South Wales. Now, this analysis is based on 33,800 points and it was extensively analysed, so the results are really quite robust. So now let's move to this impact of after the fire. And specifically what we want to talk about here is the effects of salvage logging on burnt forest. Now, the data are extensive from all around the world. Post-fire logging has effects on large trees, on the recruitment of habitat. The composition of the vegetation is altered quite dramatically. The soils are heavily impacted. Birds, plants, and invertebrates are heavily affected. And quite surprisingly, the short and medium-term fire risk is also elevated in salvage logged areas. So the data from around the world indicates that post-fire logging is actually the most damaging form of logging of any kind of logging. And I'll just give you a little bit of data that is showing what's happening. This is a study of birds in the wetter forests in Victoria, and the lowest species richness for birds is actually in the salvage logged areas. And similarly here, this is from Al Bowd's work on soils and fire and logging. And the red squares basically indicate areas that have had a history of salvage logging and the levels of different nutrients from ammonium, phosphorus, right through to sulfur in these analyses. So the effects of salvage logging will be seen in forests for up to 80 years. But from an ecological perspective, forests that do this, and I know that there's a lot of this happening on the South Coast, forests that resprout are not killed. And the whole notion of doing salvage logging in these kinds of areas is seriously ecologically nonsensical. Okay, so let's think about what can be done in the context of what's happening with fire and logging and biodiversity. The first thing is that we actually need to look at the spatial conflict between where logging is occurring and biodiversity. And we've actually done this in a paper published in 2019. And what we found is that the top 10% of most important areas for threatened species in Victoria are actually also the same areas that are targeted for logging under the Timber Release Plan. In fact, this was admitted by Vic Forest Legal Counsel, who indicated that the vast majority of logging coops contain habitat modelled within a high likelihood score of occurrence. And what the senior counsel for Vic Forest admitted was that if they couldn't log endangered species habitat, Vic Forest would go broke. So we'll talk about that some more. But basically what this paper showed, 2019, was that areas targeted for logging are also very, very important for biodiversity. And there's a high degree of conflict between the two. The second thing that's really important to think about, and this is particularly important in southeastern New South Wales, is to think about the resource availability. What is left for the industry after these recurrent wildfires? And this is from a paper that will soon be published, where we looked at the incidence of fire and the amount of time that it takes to grow a sawlog and the amount of time that it takes to grow old growth forest. And essentially fire is competing very successfully with logging for access to forests. And it essentially means that native forests will have almost no resource to continue to produce sawlogs. For example, in northeastern Victoria, almost 60% of everything that was planned to be logged in the next 5 years got burnt. And statewide in Victoria, 30% of everything that was planned to be logged in the next timber release plan has been burnt. So a key issue here then is that when we start to think about the reserve design for animals and plants and biodiversity, there is this high level of conflict. And what's also happening is that logging is now starting to take place in areas that are at the margins of legality. Okay, so this is a photograph of a logging coop in Victoria that's over 30 degrees. And the law states in Victoria that you should not be logging forests more than 30 degrees in slope. But the industry has basically overcut the resource to the extent where it has to go to these kinds of places and essentially break the law to be able to access resource. And so this is happening increasingly. And you can see landscapes where there are numerous logging coops now scattered across the landscape. And essentially the potential for being able to access timber legally is declining quite dramatically. And that's really the basis for a whole series of court cases in Victoria. So this work on steep slopes steep slope breaches was published last week in the journal Environmental Science and Policy. And what we found from the Victorian government's own data layers was that roughly 3/4 of all logging coops had slopes over 30 degrees. 15% of coops had 10% of the area above 30 degrees. And 72% of logging coops had logging exclusion zones that had actually been logged. So the other thing we actually need to do is look at the economics. And this is something that really needs to happen in New South Wales in particular, because the industry in New South Wales, particularly in the South Coast, is actually a lot less economic than it is in Victoria. And if you look in Victoria, Vic Forest's losses have quadrupled in the last 4 years. So what we can see in the little blue circle at the top is that this is the income from their sale of forest products at 94 million, but their total expenses from transactions is 109 million. And these kinds of differentials between how much they make versus how much they lose is pretty common in many parts of the world. Now, the thing that's interesting here in the little green circle is that there's a magical number here that's suddenly entered into the books of more than 18, nearly $19 million, which is income from other government entities. So what's happening is that other government entities are giving Vic Forests money, subsidies, to make it look less worse than it actually is. So some good examples of voodoo accounting. So if you look at an assessment, economic assessment, so the numbers become really quite stark. So this is from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and this was an assessment of the industry, native forest industry in Victoria. One single full-time equivalent job costs $5,041,000 for that job in terms of capital and other investment. And you can see in the plantation sector, it's a tenth of that. And then in other sectors, it's significantly lower again. So jobs cost a lot of money in this industry, even though it's making large losses. And if we look in even more detail at the economics, so that this is the testimony from a court case last year. Vic Forest advises that the East Gippsland mixed species business has been running at a loss, estimated 5.5 million per annum, and it's uncommercial. Vic Forest contends it no longer has the capacity to cross-subsidise this loss. So this is not me saying this. This is actually from a court case. Quite extraordinary. So when you do the economic and environmental accounting, as you can see from these coloured balloons, we can look at the different relative values of the different natural resource sectors. And we see that, for example, the value of water from a forest at $310 million is roughly 25.5 times the value of the native forest timber from those same forests. So if you are making decisions about economic viability, you wouldn't continue doing what you're doing. So the other analysis that's allied with this is that the trade-off suggests that Victoria would be somewhere between $110 and $192 million better off without the sector cutting its forests now. And this work comes from some terrific studies led by Heather Keith when she was formerly at the Fenner School. So the last couple of slides, what do we do? So clearly in fighting, we have to fight climate change, no doubt about it, and we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, we actually not only need to draw down CO2 in the atmosphere, we actually have to store that CO2 for long periods of time, and native forests are a really important area to be able to do that. We need to have more focus on the economics of native forest harvesting relative to other industries, and that was really the basis for that accounting work that I showed before. And we need to regrow the old growth estate, in part because that's where fire severity is the lowest, even if we weren't concerned about biodiversity, which is often most species rich in older forests. The other thing we need to do is that many landscapes are now burning so extensively and so frequently that we actually need to reduce fire by detecting fires rapidly and then suppressing them rapidly. And I think new technology's got an important role to play in that space. I think we shouldn't be logging forests that eventually become more fire prone. through those kinds of analyses that we talked about before. We certainly shouldn't be logging close to human settlements because of the risk of elevated fire severity. And we shouldn't be logging burnt areas. So we shouldn't be salvage logging. And it's particularly silly where forests resprout naturally. And finally, this is a plug, I suppose, for the science, and that is that we've got to continue to do the long-term monitoring, because almost everything that's been discussed in the last 20 minutes has actually come from long-term monitoring. And then we actually have to use that evidence to develop good policy and good decisions. Now, I haven't been very successful in prosecuting the case for making a change, but the evidence is still there and the data is still there, and the need for making evidence-based policy and decisions is never greater than it's been now. So I just wanted to thank you for listening. And there's a list of people here that I wanted to thank. And there are 3 people that have passed away recently during some of the work that's been summarised tonight. That's David Blair, who used to work for us in the field, Jeff Wood, who was a statistician, and my mother, who was always passionate about forests. So I'm sorry I've spoken for too long. It's about 20 minutes, but I'll finish there and hand back to Maddie.
Thank you, David. That was really incredible. And it's crazy with such economic and environmental impact that these things are still happening. Next speaker, we will introduce Brad. So unfortunately, Chris, the Chief Executive of the New South Wales Nature Conservation Council, isn't able to be with us tonight, but Brad has stepped in to fill on his behalf, which is very kind of him. So the New South Wales NCC is an environmental advocacy group that's long advocated against deforestation and its impact on regional wildlife, amongst other things. They play a leading role in fire policy, education and ecology through the Healthy Ecosystems program. So Brad, I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie. Hi, everyone. And thanks for that great presentation, David. Thanks so much to the ACT Conservation Council for putting on this great talk tonight. And it's great to be working with you guys from the New South Wales Conservation Council. So, our forests are worth so much more standing, without logging them. And I'm really looking forward to working with you all to, like David said, regrow our old growth forest. I think that's a beautiful vision to be working towards. And I just wanted to talk for a few minutes about the political context in New South Wales and how we might get towards getting some political wins and actually protecting some of these native forests rather than seeing them logged. And it's something that the Nature Conservation Council is very focused on at the moment, because I think we have a really important opportunity. So like David said, the Black Summer bushfires in 2019 and 2020 were catastrophic for our forests. And in state forests, around 40%, so almost half of the state forests in New South Wales burned in that summer. On the South Coast, it was much worse. Around 80% of the state forests on the South Coast burned in those fires. So it was really severe on the South Coast. And like David said, in the younger forests that had been logged recently, many of those young trees died, a much higher proportion, almost 100% of the young trees were killed in the fires because of the high intensity fires and the way the young forests don't cope as well. So it's had a huge impact on the threatened species that live in those forests, and it's also had a big impact on timber supply and the sustainability of the timber industry in New South Wales. And there's been a massive groundswell of support in the community for protecting the forest. I think people saw a lot of koalas and a lot of wildlife during those fires fleeing from the flames, and know that now is a more important time than ever to protect the wildlife refuges that are left in our forests. So we do have a big groundswell of public support. And that's also flowed through to parliamentarians. So there are a lot of parliamentarians in New South Wales Parliament who actually think that logging our native forests is a bad idea, and after the fires, we need to do something differently. And it's kind of the classic fight that's happening in New South Wales politics at the moment between the Nationals on one hand and people like John Barilaro who want to just go in and log all the forests, And then the Liberals on the other side, who actually have a lot of environmentally minded people living in their electorates and don't want to be seen as environmental vandals. And so even within the government, the coalition government, there's this fight going on right now. And so it's a great time for people to get involved, to help demonstrate the level of concern in the public about this issue, and to help push to make sure that those voices in the government who are concerned win out and stand up to the Nationals and actually do something about it and protect some of our native forests. Because there are some species, threatened species, that lost 90% of their habitat in fires. So the remaining habitat is such an important refuge. And this battle between the Nationals and the Liberals is even going on between government agencies. So we had, on one hand, the EPA saying, the Environmental Protection Agency in New South Wales saying, hold on, Forestry Corporation, we need to assess the damage here and make sure you're not going to make things worse. And then the Forestry Corporation had this went rogue and had this really public fight with the EPA and just said, no, we're going to go in anyway. So now we have a Forestry Corporation that's basically going against precisely what the EPA ordered them to do. And local groups on the ground have done a great job at exposing a lot of the breaches that Forestry Corp have been committing. And the EPA have been prosecuting those breaches. They've been issuing stop work orders. So it's becoming clearer and clearer that Forestry Corp is going rogue. Like David said, they're going into areas where they shouldn't, because they've sort of logged out the resource to such an extent. And so I think political support is growing more and more, and the realization that we need to do something different. So the final thing is, like David said, the accounting side of things is really important. And we recently had budget estimates in New South Wales Parliament, and it was revealed that Forestry Corp is indeed losing money logging our forests. So they're logging the forest and they're losing money doing it. And that means we have another important ally, which is the Treasurer in New South Wales, who doesn't want to be throwing money at this destructive industry. So the political alignment, I think, is starting to fall into place, but we definitely still need a big push of visible public support for stopping logging in our native forests, to really force the government to do something about it. And Harriett and Joslyn will talk more about what's going on in the local areas in the South Coast and some of the ways that people can get involved and what's going on. But I wanted to plug a couple of things. So on the 22nd of May, which is in about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, we have a regional conference down at Bateman's Bay. And on that day, we'll be holding workshops and talks about the situation in forests. And so I really encourage people to get along to that. And I think Jocelyn's got a link in her presentation. And there's also going to be a rally on that day. So Saturday, the 22nd of May, there'll be a really important rally down at Bateman's Bay to the Forestry Corporation office. And it's really a chance for us to start growing that visible public support and putting pressure on some of the local members of Parliament. And if you have any friends who live in any of the South Coast electorates, especially, so Shelley Hancock, Gareth Ward, and Andrew Constance are the 3 local members down there, putting in pressure, calling on those MPs to help to protect the native forest is a really powerful thing that you and anyone you know who lives in that area can do. So I'll leave it there, but I just want to really impress that people have been fighting to protect these South Coast forests for decades and decades and decades. And I really have a feeling right now that there's a real opportunity that hasn't been there for a long time to make a difference on this issue. So it's a great time, and thanks everyone for joining the call today, and I look forward to regrowing old growth forests with you all.
Thank you, Brad. It's really great to be working with you and your campaigns, and what you're doing is so important. So thank you. We do have a few questions coming through. I'm cognizant that David has to leave early, but we might keep moving so that we can get to those questions. So thanks again, Brad. And I'll introduce you to Joslyn and Harriett now. So Joslyn and Harriett are currently leading on-ground efforts to stop logging in Southeast Forest. Joslyn moved to the South Coast 5 years ago and was shocked to see the logging devastation of local spotted gum forests. Through Coast Watchers, she now works with local groups and agencies to promote citizen science surveying of state forests and collectively holds the forestry industry to account. She works with the Canberra Forest Alliance as a South Coast representative. Harriett is a former Canberra resident who now lives in the bush near Bega. She's been a forest campaigner for more than 20 years and is currently deputy convener of the Southeast Region Conservation Alliance. Circa has campaigned against chip mill development applications to market campaigns in Japan. So I'd like to pass over to Harriett, I think is going to speak first. Thank you, Harriett.
Thanks, Maddie. Now I've got to get some slides visible too. I'll do that in a minute. This is a very good time to be campaigning for the South Coast Forest, as several people have already observed. You might say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But it's actually true right now for the political reasons that Brad outlined, but also, strangely enough, because of the bushfires. The bushfires have raised awareness in the community about the forests and logging, but they've also, because the plantation pine over in Bombala and Tumut were burnt, they've also kept the loggers who would normally be busy logging native forests busy elsewhere. So it's given us a bit of breathing space, and we really should be making good use of that. And we have quite a few more months in which to do that. Now, I'm going to try and get it. Oh, no. Okay. So where does that leave us? With messaging, we really don't have to convince people that native forests need protecting. Most people already agree with us. This is an extract from a survey done by a logging industry organisation, the Forest and Wood Products Australia. It was done before the bushfires, so it would probably be an understatement of public opinion now. It showed, as you can see, that in urban areas, 70% of people think native forest logging is unacceptable, and only 10% think it's acceptable. And it's very similar, a tiny bit lower in rural areas. Even in the electorates where logging actually takes place, there's an overwhelming opposition to it. So we don't have to change anyone's mind. We just have to mobilise that support that we've already got. And there's a few ways that we can do that. I'm going to talk about a couple of ideas that I've had that have got a particular relevance to ACT people. And Joslyn's going to talk more about the things that are already happening on the South Coast that people can hook into if they are up for it. Where are we? About a week ago, the Federal Minister for the Environment made quite a significant announcement. She was responding to a report that had been done straight after the bushfires that identified species that were in serious need of action to assist their recovery. And the gang was one of them. Everybody in Canberra knows and loves the gang. But the minister announced that the ACT government is to be responsible for coordinating and organising all of the recovery efforts for the gang in the bushfire recovery areas, not just the ACT, all over the South Coast area. And the gang's a very important species as far as just about all the other forest dwelling species are concerned, because it needs hollows. They need hollows for nesting. So if anyone's got any influence with the ACT government, that there's a good argument to be made there. Now, another thing for ACT residents is firewood. A lot of people will be surprised to know that there have been logging operations where 1/3 of all wood produced in the operation has been for firewood. Now, I'm talking living, breathing trees in the forest being cut down for no other purpose than to be burnt as firewood. In 2020, the year after the bushfires, in the southern region, 17.5% of all wood produced in logging was for firewood. Not all of it is sold in Canberra, but a lot of it is. And this graphic here it's for Sydney, but it would tell a similar story if you did something like that in Canberra. The pollution and other factors that wood heaters are responsible for. So that's a good one for Canberrans to take up too. And another one, this might be a bit more controversial, but forests have always, right from the beginning of the climate campaign in Australia, have had a bit of an uneasy relationship with the climate campaigns, the broader climate campaigns. That's changed recently, and they have been accepted as having an important place in climate campaigns. But there's still a need to push the importance of forests as a means of sequestering carbon for the good of the climate. And if anyone's involved in climate campaigns, it'd be really fantastic if you could just bear that in mind, and whenever you have a chance to give forests a bit of a push, do so. So they're things that have a particular relevance to ACT people, but whatever you decide to do, if you want to help out with protecting forests, just don't forget that the chip mill is at the heart of it. If there was no Eden wood chip mill, there would probably be no native forest logging on the south coast. Very, very little anyway. There's a whole lot of things that can be done apart from those things I've mentioned. There's political lobbying, there's media, there's social media, there's market campaigns. We'll need market campaigns when the chip mill starts producing briquettes in a couple of months' time. And of course, there's direct action, blockades, and the legal breaches and citizen science work that Joss will talk about. Now, just finally, if anyone's been a regular visitor to the far south coast, that's from about Bermagui south, you'll have travelled down Brown Mountain along the Snowy Mountains Highway, and you might have got the feeling that the forests along there on that escarpment edge have been having a pretty rough time. Well, you weren't imagining it, because these are images from Google Earth over sort of 7 or 8 year periods that show you what's happened to it. So you weren't imagining it. And in fact, what you see on that trip down is just the tip of the iceberg. It's like that all the way along the escarpment, and even worse when you get down to the coast. So I'll leave you with that very unpleasant image and hand you over to Joss.
Thanks, Harriet.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate seeing many people that I know from Canberra and the South Coast, and I see you as the community engaging to address the need to stop native forest logging. So I've got a few slides, but I'm just going to briefly go make a mention for each one. Just have to see where to click to get the next slide. So I'm going to talk about some actions that are Canberra based and some are on the South Coast. I thought I'd mention that every event and activity that's covered will be, Maddie and I are working together so that we'll have a document available to send to people. So you'll have all the links and the dates. And I've put the Canberra Forest Alliance email there for Judith, who's here, so that if anyone's interested in any aspect of this, feel free to email the Canberra Forest Alliance, and Judith will then pass the information onto the right people. I thought I'd just, as an overview, if we have a look at that green area, this is a map of the 1 million hectares that forestry logs over 50 years. And we've had so you can see that the logging is concentrated on the south coast, all along the New South Wales coast. And then closer to home, this is a little snapshot from the forestry portal between Batemans Bay and Ulladulla. It's a 12-month plan of operations with 18 compartments planned to be logged. So last year after the fires, a little group sprung up, the Broome and State Forest Conservation Group, concerned that they'd been burnt, flooded out twice, and then they're subject to logging. So one thing that people can do is look up the portal and just see the logging in their area. So the very first step in citizen science. Brad mentioned the rally that the Nature Conservation Council and with us, with the local groups on the South Coast, have organised at lunchtime during the regional conference. The conference is at the Batemans Bay Community Centre, 500 metres around the corner from forestry. We've also partnered with BirdLife Australia, so it'll be opening up their welcome to the swift parrots that are migrating from Tasmania back to the burnt New South Wales state forests, and that will need every live tree available for nectar for these returning parrots. So that's just a screenshot from the Facebook page, which has all the details. So in support of that rally, I've got some immediate actions, and it's just a real ad hoc collection because people like to do different things. So artivists are painting every Monday morning in the ACT Conservation Council office, and I've asked them if they can paint these banners. The ecotourism not logging is for the South Coast and for the rally, but the Olney State Forest is opposite Gosford, and they've asked, there's an Olney camp. I went up there at Easter and they've asked us to paint Too Precious to Log a tree banner and end native forest logging. So we're doing some work to help them. After the rally on the 22nd of May, Wilson, the forest campaigner from the Nature Conservation Council, said, what do we do next? And, you know, people who are interested in helping organise, you know, the option of a rally outside Barralara's office, and then further up on the South Coast, a rally, you know, or an action outside Shelley Hancock's office in Nowra. They're sort of key pieces of work that will be going on. Now, Harriett mentioned the Firewood campaign. This is the Sapphire Coast. As everyone knows, the Sapphire Coast is near Merimbula, and this is an enormous wood yard down the road from the flat I stay in Queanbeyan. There's also 2 wood yards in Canberra, and I'm certain that that firewood is from our native forests. So Canberra Forest Alliance has started, you know, emailing back and forth between some of the between some of the ACT MLAs to get traction on, you know, Canberra's a big city, even though they've got a policy to phase out firewood. The population concerned about native forest logging could take on the issue of having a sustainable firewood campaign. I don't know what the solution is, but I just quickly jotted some down in about 1 minute, so I'm sure something can be worked out. But basically, the stems of whole trees are cut down and put on a logging truck and taken to the wood yard. The whole tree top is left as logging waste. So we could have a portable firewood industry accessing firewood from the waste rather than from the trucks. Just as another aside, mountain bike clubs, they may be interested in working on the fact that forestry logs mountain bike tracks on the coast that are being used by the clubs down here. And I know that the council are getting a you know, multi-million-dollar funding for, or $1 million funding for a mountain bike track. It's in state forest and they just log straight over the tracks. Where Coast Watchers is now having forest tours in association with some events. So feel free to come along to the tours, or if you want to come along to another date, just sign up for the next one. It'll be in the Sunday morning because there's no logging generally on Sundays, to have a look at a logged forest and to also see some of the citizen science in action. And the Sunday, the 16th of May, that's a little bit different. That's a forest survey, and that's being organised by the National Parks Association in Milton. And that'll be in Shallow Crossing, just a bit north. It's on the Clyde River. That's due to start logging shortly. And now I'm going to just go a little bit into mammals, into sort of citizen science, and I'm just throwing down specific projects that people that are on the ground now. So Keith Joel is with us today, and he is instrumental in organising koala habitat surveys. So that's looking to see if there's suitable trees for koalas. And he's now up to the point of doing private property surveys. I know that we're going up on the May the 2nd to look at some private property near Currawong. That private property holder is very concerned about logging. She's in that map that I showed you between Batemans Bay and Ulladulla. University of Wollongong have monthly surveys, checking cameras in Monga National Park and Buckenbarra State Forest. It's very interesting. It's a very good way to learn how cameras are used to see what wildlife has survived in these very burnt forests. And it's to see if spotted quolls survive better in national parks compared to state forests. I've got wombat burrows there because if you're surveying state forest, wombat burrows can be digitally marked, and then logging trucks are not allowed to drive over them. So the Glenbog Wombat Protocol was can be triggered, and it happened after quite a few wombat burrows were run over. And then the local wombat sanctuary took action. So these are some more formal, bigger, or sort of coming up programs. So BirdLife Australia is organising a swift parrot search program. And so I guess this is for bird experts, but there's 2 surveys coming up in 6-week periods, but they're not only surveying for swift parrots, it'll be for all birds found, including gang cockatoos. So they'll be promoting that up and down the coast. I know there's a lot of the Canberra Ornithological Group may be interested in that. We've just started having talks with iNaturalist. iNaturalist is an international citizen science project, but Nature Mapper started in Canberra and there's 2 projects on the coast as well, and they've now morphed into iNaturalist. And they have agreed to start a state forest project for people to log their citizen science findings, which will be the first of its kind. And that's really, we've only had 2 Zooms. So if someone wants to become a hero and help us, there's room, and that would work very well on an online basis to work with moderators on getting that project up. Getting up to the compliance side of citizen science. I mean, this would suit people who are regularly coming down to the coast or who have family property, but people who are concerned about logging that's happening near them and go out and look at it, learn about the rules that must be, is meant to be maintained by the operators. But David mentioned that, you know, they just can't operate. They're logging in areas with threatened species. So this is a photo of a nectar tree that was spray painted by forestry to be retained for swift parrots. And it's barcoded. It's been cut down. There's about 5 of them that have been cut down, and they were cut down only 6 weeks after forestry was fined twice for failing to keep swift parrot records, and it's in the same forest. I kid you not. The Mogo State Forest, they were fined on the 1st of March by the EPA, Harriett mentioned that a lot of the logging is happening in the pine forest, but they are doing some logging. It's not as much, but so they've started up in the Mogo State Forest, and we see these nectar trees cut down. So that's been reported to the EPA. And we hope that'll join one of the 16 matters that's being taken to prosecution. And some of those matters are being prosecuted because of locals doing citizen science, and the Northeast Forest Alliance are very good at that. I've got a link to their website with all the reports they do. So this is about holding the industry to account. This is one that Northeast Forest Alliance reported, 2 giant trees, the diameter is over 1.4 metres. Surely the contractors can't miss that, but no, the trees were cut down and it led to stop work orders. Then there's the doing citizen science before logging, and this is what we're really interested in, where people with particular skills in surveying, like birds and plants and mammals, if we go out and survey and find things, we can report them through on the bioatlas, and that triggers protection. So bird nests trigger protection around the trees. There's a whole range of rules, environmental rules, that the loggers say they're subject to, that you can actually insist be applied, and it means that less trees are cut down. So it's a key aspect of the work that we do, and locals are very interested in this because they know what's in their forest and they want those particular features to be protected. So as Brad mentioned, there's a regional conference, and all these matters I've been speaking about will be covered in this conference. The fires changed everything. We're having a panel with Virginia Young from Griffith Uni, will also be speaking on logging increasing fire risk. Graham Moore is Indigenous, speaking on cultural burning, and Kelwyn White, she'll be talking about asset protection, which saves doing quota burning just out in national parks. And then I'll be doing a lot more on citizen science, but with BirdLife Australia, we've got Deb talking about swift parrots, Manana Matters, their case of saving unburnt forest from housing has led to World Wildlife Fund donating funding to the EDO, which was mentioned in one of the questions, to save. They now are looking at 6 unburnt forests on the south coast that they want to support with funding for the EDO for legal challenges against building developments. So that'll be part of what's covered that day. And then this will all be sent to you. We've got some links to petitions. And then the other thing people can do is check websites, get on email lists and Facebook pages. Because I will say it's very complex and it's an ongoing project, so people just need to keep up to date, and we'll send those references. So thank you. And I need to stop share. There we are.
Thanks, Joss. So Helen, our Executive Director, has actually joined us once again. So Helen, I'll pass over to you to facilitate the questions.
Thanks, Maddie, and my apologies for running a bit late tonight. I'm aware that David has to head off shortly, so I'm going to just open by throwing quickly to the first question for you, David, which was, how does the ecosphere data from Victoria, now accepted, how is that also applied to New South Wales southeast forests, not just by extrapolation as a statement, but such as most likely this applies to New South Wales state forests? Do we need a new study, I think the question is, or can it be extrapolated, the data that's been developed?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Yep. Okay, so what we did was we used the Victorian government's classification for ecosystems called the ecosystem, the EVC classification system, and those ecosystems don't recognise the borders between New South Wales and Victoria. So you're looking at lowland dry forest, wet and dry EVC classes. So they're, in many cases, at the same tree species. And the important thing is we're seeing the same shaped curve for flammability of young forests between 10 and 40 years. Now, other researchers such as Phil Zylstra from University of Wollongong and Murdoch University are finding the same shaped flammability curve as we've seen. So the important thing here is that it's not just 1 or 2 studies now, it's a whole series of studies that are showing this. And in fact, the one study that suggests that there's no relationship between logging, stand age, and flammability, if you actually analyze their data properly, which they did not do, but when you look at their data, you actually see exactly the same as what we saw. So this is starting to become a pattern that is common across many studies. So I would be absolutely stunned if the results that come from northeastern Victoria, as we've just seen and just had accepted, do not extend across into New South Wales. In fact, we already know that the alpine ash forests in New South Wales show exactly that shape flammability curve that I showed before.
So is it something that politically needs to be re-prosecuted, or is it something that is there a mechanism by which that information will get generalised and be accepted by?
It needs to be more widely, the case needs to be more widely prosecuted that young regenerating forests recovering after logging are more prone to high severity fire. Now that needs to be recognised as empirical data from very detailed, exhaustive analysis across many different types of forest. That's the pattern that we're seeing. Now, why is that important? It endangers people in rural communities and it puts those settlements at risk. And so we should not be logging anywhere near these towns and settlements because of the risk of elevated fire severity. Now, this is a really severe problem given the number of high forest fire danger index days that we're starting to see right across southern Australia. We need to remove those things that we can do in the short term to reduce the flammability of forests, and logging those forests is one of those things that we can do something about very quickly.
Thanks, David. I've got another one for you. So I'm heavily loading them towards you at the moment. It says, and I'm sorry I missed your presentation, so I'm going to enjoy going back and having a listen to it. It says, due to your information, banning plastics means more trees are being logged to return wood, cutlery, paper plates, etc. Do you think that you would rethink these ramifications of banning plastics? I'm not sure if you touched on it in your presentation.
No, I wouldn't, because if you think about where do most of our wood products come from in sawn wood products come from in New South Wales and Victoria, it's from plantations. So 88% of all sawn timber in New South Wales and in Victoria already comes from plantations. So the reality here is, what are we using native forests for in southern New South Wales and Victoria? Well, in Victoria, the number is 87% of all native forest that's logged in Victoria goes into the wood chip, paper pulp, box liner, wood streams. Okay, so if we know that we can produce wood products from plantations, and we know that most of those wood products of reasonable value already come from plantations, we don't need to keep logging native forests to produce high volume, low value wood chips and paper pulp and box liners and the like. We also know that when you produce wood products from plantations, it actually is much better for carbon emissions. You have lower emissions when you produce wood products from plantations. Heather Keith led a paper on that in 2014, again in the journal Ecosphere.
Which segues quite nicely to the next question, which I'm not sure if this is for you or if anybody else in the room would like to tackle this one. Can state and federal governments earn income from native forests being used primarily as a carbon store, which I think they can, and not logged? But what is the mechanism and why don't we do it? I'm assuming the answer to that is about politics and process. And
yes, it's sheer politics. It's sheer politics, because essentially all that's needed here is a carbon methodology, a proper carbon methodology that people such as Professor Andrew McIntosh and others can readily develop. And then you'll have large banks, You'll have companies that are desperate for offsets, looking for opportunities to invest in long-term carbon storage. Now, the important thing is that you still need a workforce to manage that resource. In fact, that resource is worth more as a carbon stock than it is as wood chips. The accounting work shows that quite clearly. So what's needed here is you don't need a massive hemorrhage of jobs in rural New South Wales or northeastern Victoria, because you need a workforce to manage that carbon stock, to replant areas that are lacking natural regeneration or that have been cleared that could be reforested. So there's massive opportunities here for an industry that will not be such a burden on the public purse, but actually create an opportunity through a new industry, which is long-term carbon storage.
So, and it always seems to come down to this, if there's an economic gain to be made through doing that, and there are environmental losses from logging within the forest industry, and we're subsidising the logging as it stands, why is it still continuing? And I feel like that you must have discussed this in the presentation, but I've just picked up a question from the chat bar that asks that question, so I will put it to you. But again, I'm assuming it's about politics, and I'm assuming it's about keeping the logging industry alive, or the industry alive.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is that there actually needs to be an economic analysis, independent economic analysis done that underscores where the true benefits and costs are and what the true values of these industries are, and then it needs to go into the political sphere so that people can see, for example, that one full-time equivalent job in the native forest industry costs over $5 million, or 10 times more than a full-time equivalent job in the plantation sector. And to talk about the trade-offs. So we know that in Victoria, without a native forest industry, the state will be the best part of $110 to $200 million a year better off. Now, there's an awful lot of hospital beds, aged care beds, roads, all sorts of other things that you can do with that money, rather than basically throwing it up against the wall, how we're presently doing it. So we need to produce options for government to recognise that there's a better way to spend taxpayers' money.
Thanks, David. Does anyone else, I'm just going to throw it open to see if anyone else had a question for David that wasn't in the chat bar that they'd just like to ask out loud before he disappears. There's another question in the chat bar from Peter. What else can be done to manage fire in our forest areas other than campaigning to reduce logging while we wait for young forests to become old? We still need to manage fuel loads. Good way is regular burning. Sorry, I'm skipping over that.
Okay, so I'll have to quickly answer that because I've got to be gone in 2 minutes.
Yep.
Okay, so the first thing is that there's way too much fire in the landscape. So what do we do about that? First one is we have to detect fire more quickly, and then we have to suppress fires more quickly. And I think there's a role for technology in doing that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that prescribed burning is useful, but it needs to be done tactically, and it needs to be done very close to properties and human infrastructure. That's where it works. There is no point in doing large-scale prescribed burns in remote areas because it has limited effect there. And you have to do it every 3 to 5 years because that's how quickly the fuel returns. So there are ways to focus your prescribed burning so that it has an effect. But I think ultimately technology is really important to detect and suppress fires as rapidly as possible so you can reduce the extent and control them while it's still possible to do so.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, David, for your time this evening. I know you need to leave us, and we really appreciate your valuable input both to this campaign and to bringing people in Canberra up to speed. It's been really appreciated. Thank you.
Cheers. Sorry, I have to leave. Bye.
So I think with David leaving the room, the virtual room, we might sort of just swing back to Harriett and Joslyn and Brad and just talk politics for a bit. I mean, I guess this question that's come up in the chat bar is really, you know, the evidence has been clear for a long time. The politics hasn't changed. Is there something that we need to be doing differently, or something that is there some momentum here that there's actually there's a chance that things will change around here? I mean, how do we get these arguments out to a wider audience, and what needs to happen from here? And I guess I know that you've talked about various events that are coming up, but what would be a great way for people in Canberra who have quite a stake in this particular region to potentially get more involved in the campaign? Maybe a throw to you first, Brad or Harriet, anyone?
Yeah, I'm happy to
Joslyn, I
kick
can't
off.
see you. There you are.
I think that's really important to note, Helen, is that people have been working on this issue really hard for a long time, and nevertheless, there's still like this political intransigence to do anything about it. But also, I want to say that there have been wins along the way. So there's been big reservations, you know, that environmental work has led to large amounts of protection. And I guess on the South Coast, the Murray Flora Reserve was only a few years ago that South Coast groups achieved that. And that's a massive achievement and really important for things like the koala population down there. So we have been, I think, as a movement, making slow progress. But I think the reason that this industry is still supported so stridently by some politicians is the same with all of the resources industries in Australia that, you know, get government support, that do destructive work, like the coal industry. It's because they have a lot of political access and relationships, and they lobby hard. And so organisations like the Australian Forest Products Association, very happy to run scare campaigns to, you know, crying about jobs that don't really exist and making up numbers and conflating the plantation industry with the native forest industry. So like David said, around 90% of our timber products come from plantations already. And yet when the forestry industry are talking, they'll bundle those jobs up with the native forest jobs and pretend that it's all going to fall over if we just protect a few threatened species. So I think the challenges that we face are sort of similar to a lot of issues, and the way we make progress is similar to the way that we've made progress on some of those issues. And that, I think, on this campaign is about steadily building up that those political champions in the government who can start to push back. And so, yeah, building awareness among MPs that the industry's losing money and so on. And I just really think that right now it is an important time, because a lot of that work has already happened. Like since the fires, a lot of members of parliament realise that we need to change what we're doing. So yeah, I think anything that can be done to continue to share that information, that logging is making fires worse, that the logging industry is losing taxpayers' money, and the local ecology really needs a chance to recover, will go a long way.
I'd just like to add something there. If I knew the answer to this, it would have stopped decades ago. But it seems to defy, the logging industry seems to defy all the usual sort of political rules. Like, they're not great political donors. They don't make big money. Although the chip mill did make a good profit in 2018-19, it made $10 million. But that was very unusual. Usually it's much less than that, and quite often it makes a loss. It hasn't put in a report to ASIC since then, so we don't know. The employment's dropped spectacularly because it's become more highly mechanised. You know, as David said, it requires over $5 million to support one job in the native forest logging industry. You know, at any normal sort of logging operation, if you see in the forest, the equipment that you'll see there will be worth over $2 million in a normal logging operation. There's a lot of money tied up in it, and it's the machines more than the jobs, I think, that are important. But the advantage of that is that they're all transferable to other sectors. And we do actually see them being transferred. I mean, we see the trucks, for example, now that historically have hauled native forest logs have moved over to plantations. You see the machines in the logging plantation wood rather than native forest. Sometimes they go backwards and forwards, but you know, they can easily be transferred, and they are. And we just need to make it go further. The plantation sector was seriously burnt in the fires, but not nearly as badly as the native forest sector was. So we're very well placed at this time to make sure that transition does go further. A lot of people don't know that the chip mill does already process quite a lot of pine as wood chips. And there's a market for that. And in fact, a bit over a year ago, the price for pine wood chips was higher than the native forest wood chip price. And you'd sort of have to ask yourself, why on earth don't they go to 100% pine in circumstances like that? But I think there's an ideology that keeps it there. It's not economics. It's not all the normal political rules. It's just ideology.
The whaling of Australia.
Yeah. Well, indeed.
Harriet, there's been and Joss, there's been just a chat in the sidebar about the subsidies that are currently, or a question about whether the subsidies have changed in recent years. Can either of you speak to those about?
I can. I think. What's the question?
Sorry, Joss. Did you answer that question, or do you want to speak to that now? Where's she gone? There she is. Joss, did you want to speak to that?
Well, I was chatting with Brad about, when they saved the Murray Reserve for koalas, the government then just handed out more money to logging contractors' diesel subsidy. So because they had to drive further to get trees to go to the wood chip mill, they would have more of their more money from the government. And I understand a truckload of logs might only earn $150 subsidy. So the private company that's getting this wood for very cheap is the one making the money, and it's going offshore. So, those wood chips are getting sold overseas. And I also know that the plantation sector can meet the wood supply, the Australian wood supply. So we really need to think about what's being exported overseas and what it's being used for.
There's a couple of things there. Eden is exporting whole pine logs. Now, all you need to do is just stop that and have them processed onshore, either as building materials or as wood chips even. It's insane to export whole logs. On the subsidy question, that I've been collecting information on subsidies for quite a few years, and I've got a link to a page where they're all listed, but I don't know quite how to get it. I could put it up in the chat, but there's definitely been quite a few million to the chip mill in the last year, much more so than it warrants. I remember when the bushfires were happening and we had a lot of media coming to cover the fires when they hit Eden. Invariably, they would go to the chip mill and describe it as the biggest employer in the region. And it just wasn't. And there was no way you could get it through to them that it was actually a tiny employer. There were 30 people there. There were more people employed at the high school or in the pub. But, no one wanted to know that.
So, Harriet, just on the chip mill, what's the current status of the chip mill in terms of the development proposal? And is there...
well, there's been a legal challenge to it that is going to land in Environment Court next month. But unfortunately, when they first took it to court, they didn't get an injunction. They weren't able to get an injunction to stop the building of it. So the building of the new facilities is going ahead, but it will hit legal scrutiny in May.
And is the chip mill being justified because, you said that 90% of what went through the chip mill was actually softwoods or pine anyway. Is that
not 90%?
sorry.
It's probably more like about 30%.
Oh, okay, right.
But it would vary. At the moment, it would be a lot more than 30%, because there's much more pine available.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I've got there's comments coming through on this chat line. I don't know if people can just check in there. You can see some of the conversation that's going on. There's a question about who's propping up the FPA. Sorry, I'm assuming that's a Forest Products Association, is it? Yep. Great. Okay. And we don't know the answer to that. I think that was the summary of that chat. Sorry, it's quite hard to keep track of the chat when it's moving so quickly.
Brad Haft answered it.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Brad. There's a question about any ideas on how to get softwood plantation industry growing again would be welcome. Australia doesn't have enough plantation saw log right now and forecast to get even further behind increasing demand for timber. And then, Joss, did you want to speak to that political commentary that you've just added to wrap up? Did you have any sort of final comments about where political pressure should be applied? Didn't want to put you on the spot, sorry.
I know that people have been talking about how the Liberal Party is being being affected by the position of the Nationals, and the Nationals have become even more conservative because the Shooters, they lost 2 seats to the Shooters Party on the Darling River in the last election. So we do have some progressive, more of a progressive aspect there in the Liberal Party. So it isn't just about changing government, about getting wins with the existing government. And I really think that the funding and court cases are the answer to show the logging's illegal. So Bunnings has pulled out of products from the Victorian forest, and Bunnings also owns Officeworks, and there's a big paper mill in Maryvale. So I really think consumer action, court action are the answer.
Great. Okay. Does anyone else like to put their hand up to ask a question out loud? Is there any questions in the chat that I've missed?
Can I just mention I've put a link there to the page with subsidy information on it in the chat there.
Great. Thanks, Harriet.
If anyone's interested.
So just so that people are aware, we will gather up all of the links. So the events that are coming up in Braidwood, the rally, the conference, and all of the links that have been talked about tonight, we'll gather those up and put those into an email that we'll send out to you tomorrow. Also a link to this event. So this event has been recorded and we'll pop it onto YouTube so that people can re-watch the event and see the presentations again and grab that data if you need to. I'd like to take this chance to thank our presenters for the evening, just as we're wrapping up. Thank you to Joslyn and Harriet for your ongoing work in this area. I think has been made really clear. I mean, this campaign's been running for a very, very long time, and I think there's a lot of people on the call who've been involved with it. I can see Mark Blakers, Indra, and I'm sure there's others that have been intimately involved, Mike, who've been intimately involved with this campaign over many, many years. And I think what we'd like to do with the Conservation Council is just think a little bit about how we can leverage Canberrans' love of the South Coast to support the campaign. The expertise and the insights that you are able to share with us hopefully will help us come up with something where we can actually talk to our community more about where they can apply pressure when it's most strategic in the campaign, and how we can leverage people to do that. I think that's what we can probably bring to it. We have a community of people in Canberra who care deeply about the region, and certainly probably would be the 80% of people who would actually think that native forest logging is unacceptable going forward. So thank you for your time this evening, and particular thanks to Maddie for organising this event tonight, and my apologies again for being late, and thank you to Brad for filling in for Chris. Much appreciated, Brad, and we look forward to working with NCC and Circa and Canberra Forest Alliance to hopefully help out and keep this issue running where we can. So thanks very much for your time tonight. And I will leave it to Maddie to close the session because she has control of the Zoom. Oh, and just before you all go, sorry, Indra's just messaged it on the side before you close, Maddie. For those people who knew Deb Foskey, who was a great campaigner for our local environment, but also for the forests of East Gippsland, there will be a memorial service for Deb in Canberra on Saturday. So if people who know Deb and who would like to attend, Indra, I think it's being held at, is it 1 o'clock?
Yarralumla Primary School, 1:30 p.m. Saturday.
1:30 till 3:30, Yarralumla Primary School on Saturday. And you can get in touch with Indra if you're able to on Facebook and let her know that you're coming. I'm sure most of you know how to do that. So yeah, Deb was a great lady, and it'd be great after the COVID to be able to pay our respects to her and the work that she did. Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, Maddie.